in the horror genre. I'm your host, Nicole, and it's time to share another dark tale. Welcome back, friends and weirdos, and Happy New Year. With the new year, I am launching a new series, but before we get into that, I have a new supporter to thank. I would like to give a big shout out to Lou, who is not only a new Patreon supporter, but also a friend of the show and a fellow female horror nerd. The sisterhood continues to run deep in this community. Lou, I appreciate your friendship and your support of my little show. Thank you so much. So as you know, I have been covering religion and horror for the last couple of years. It's been an interesting series and I have really enjoyed it a lot. However, as I was thinking about the future of the show, I decided it was time to explore something new territory, and I thought about a few things, but it led me to an idea for a new series that is launching today. And the new series is called Fundamental Frights, which is a series about the movies that define our experience with the horror genre. So you may be asking, what does that mean exactly? So people ask me all the time what my favorite horror movies are. Especially normies, when they find out I like scary stuff, it's always, oh, what's your favorite? And although I'm always excited to talk about horror, it's a question that I've come to dread a little bit. And I've kind of wondered, why is that? You think we would be really excited to talk about horror. But I think it's because it's very difficult to pick a favorite from a genre with such a rich history. I've been watching horror movies for 3 decades. I've seen a lot. Different movies have had meaning to me, important meaning to me at different times. How am I supposed to pick just one or even 3 from a lifetime of viewing? And then there's this added pressure to pick a classic, instead of something that resonates with you personally. Like when somebody asks you what your favorite, it's like, oh God, am I supposed to say The Shining? Am I supposed to say Jaws? Am I supposed to say, there's just this sort of pressure. And then there's also the audience to consider, who asked you this? Is the person who asked me this question, when I give them an answer, are they going to go watch this film? Will they be horrified? If they do, will they be disappointed and think it's not scary enough? So I've come to understand that many things come into play when we're talking about our favorite horror films. There are the first ones we ever saw, the ones that we think are the most influential to us, the most memorable ones, the ones that shocked us the most, the ones that introduced us to a new subgenre. The list just goes on and on and on. So I thought that would make a really great series to kind of dig in and explore some of that. So I decided that it would be fun to talk about some of my own favorites and also chat with friends about which horror movies are important to them and why. Really, the goal of this series is to have fun and also dig into the heart of why horror is so important to us. So, without further ado, let's kick off 2025 and Fundamental Frights with the 1984 classic, A Nightmare on Elm Street.
The kids of Elm Street don't know it yet, but something is coming to get them.
There's something out there, isn't there? just see cuts happen.
What did that, Lieutenant?
I don't know.
Tina!
What's the coroner got to say?
He's in the John puking since he saw it.
They're gonna kill me for sure.
Did you do it?
There was somebody else there.
He was locked in a room with a girl who went in alive and came out in a rubber bag.
No one knows where it came from or who it will visit next.
Nancy? There's something wrong with you. You're imagining things.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Do you believe in the boogeyman?
No.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
No!
She's the only one who can stop it. If she fails,
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
no one will survive. From Wes Craven, director of The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left, a new masterpiece in fantasy terror, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Teenager Nancy Thompson and her friends are haunted by nightmares of a disfigured man wearing a bladed glove who attacks them in a boiler room. Tina Gray, one of Nancy's best friends, experiences the most intense dream in which the man violently slashes her. In the real world, Tina is found dead after being fatally attacked in her sleep. Her boyfriend, Rod Lane, is arrested for the murder, though he insists his innocence, claiming he witnessed Tina's death at the hands of an unseen force. This bizarre chain of events points to a disturbing connection between the victims' shared nightmares. As Nancy continues to experience vivid dreams about the man, she discovers he is the same figure tormenting her friends. In class, she burns her arm on a pipe in an attempt to wake herself from a dream, and later learns that Rod, too, has been plagued by dreams of the same man. The mysterious killer is revealed to be Fred Krueger, a child murderer who was burned alive by vengeful parents after he was acquitted on a technicality. Now, as a malevolent spirit, Krueger seeks revenge on the children of those whose parents killed him, including Nancy and her friends. Despite staying awake with the help of caffeine and trying to avoid sleep, Nancy is attacked multiple times in her dreams, and several of her friends die in their sleep, including Rod and Glenn, Nancy's boyfriend. Nancy discovers that Krueger's strength lies in the fear he instills in his victims, and when she grabs his fedora from a dream and pulls it into the real world, she begins to put together a plan to bring Freddy into the real world. To protect herself and her family, Nancy barricades the house and prepares to face Krueger directly. She rigs the house with booby traps and lures him into the real world, where she manages to set him on fire and lock him in the basement. However, Krueger escapes, and during a final confrontation, he attacks Nancy's mother, Marge. After a violent struggle, Krueger and Marge vanish into the bed, only for Krueger to rise again, more powerful than before. Nancy, realizing that Krueger's power is fueled by his victim's fear, faces him without fear. As she turns back to him, Krueger vanishes, seemingly defeated. Nancy steps outside, finding that all her friends and her mother are alive. As she and Glenn drive off in his convertible with their friends, the top suddenly closes and traps them inside. The car speeds uncontrollably, and Marge is dragged through the front door by Krueger, signaling that the nightmare is far from over. In the final scene, 3 girls in white dresses chant Krueger's nursery rhyme as the film leaves the threat of his return looming.
1, 2, Fred's coming for you.
So it's kind of fitting that I'm starting 2025 with a Wes Craven film, because I started 2024 with a Wes Craven film. January's episode last year was The Serpent and the Rainbow. So that's a fun little parallel, and I don't know, maybe I'll have to kick off every year with a Wes Craven film. It's not a bad way to start a new year. And before we get into Nightmare on Elm Street specifically, I just want to talk about Wes Craven a little bit, because he's such an important figure in the horror genre. He directed 3 genre-changing films over 3 decades. He directed Last House on the Left in 1972, A Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984, and Scream in 1996. Now, he's directed several other movies that I really like, but those three pretty much are universally accepted as a big deal in the horror genre. Last House on the Left is one of those infamous movies that you hear about as just like real brutal, difficult to watch. When I finally did watch it in my 20s probably, I didn't think it was a great movie. It has real like tone issues where it's very serious and very brutal and then kind of like real goofy. I don't know if that was intentional or just it was made by young filmmakers. It was Wes Craven and Sean S. Cunningham, who went on to do Friday the 13th. So I don't know if they were just kind of like learning how to make a movie and that's why there are some issues, or if it was intentional. But either way, Last House on the Left is important, but not necessarily fun to watch. And then, of course, there's A Nightmare on Elm Street, which I love, or I wouldn't be talking about it. And then Scream in 1996 was another real big one for me and for the genre. I will probably be doing an episode on Scream in the Fundamental Frights series, so I don't want to say too much, but in a nutshell, the horror genre was kind of dead in the 90s. Some great stuff came out in the 90s, but I remember even as a kid thinking that when I would go to the store, the video store, to rent movies, they were always old. It was never anything current. And so when Scream came out, it like rejuvenated the horror genre and like brought it back. And that was, of course, hugely important for horror fans of my age. Another thing about Wes Craven is that he was a reluctant master of horror. He was always trying to break out of the horror genre and do something different. And he did make a few movies that weren't horror, but horror was always where he found his success. And even though maybe he never aspired to the types of movies that maybe he wanted to make, his films were still important, even starting with Last House on the Left. His films really tackle themes of violence and vigilante justice, revenge. Those themes are in Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, Nightmare on Elm Street, family trauma, the corrupted American dream, all these things that make us love horror, these complicated things, asking the hard questions, making us uncomfortable. That's what horror does. Now, of course, on the surface, his movies are just a lot of fun, right? That's another reason why we love horror movies, because they're fun to watch. But they often have more to say if you want to dig a little bit. And so I would say that even though Wes Craven was a reluctant master of horror, he still made important films, as I said. Also, he was a meta horror pioneer. As I've already said, Scream reinvigorated the genre and it did something different. Now, he did not write Scream. Kevin Williamson wrote Scream. So all of the stuff in Scream about horror fans talking about horror, where we sort of break that fourth wall and start to examine horror in our society, that was written by Kevin Williamson, but still, Wes Craven brought his spin to it, brought his influence to it, so he's a part of it. Also, before Scream, 2 years before Scream, was Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and that movie is a little bit of a prototype to Scream, I think, because it's doing the same thing. It's Heather Langenkamp playing herself. She's aware of the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Robert Englund is in it. He's aware of the Freddy Krueger character. So there's this really interesting real world versus Nightmare on Elm Street franchise dichotomy that's going on. And a lot of what we see in New Nightmare, those same kind of feelings, those same themes show up again in Scream. So his work in that little corner of the genre, really important. Unfortunately, Wes Craven is no longer with us. He died in 2015. Time flies. It seems like it was just yesterday. But he died of, I believe, a brain cancer. He was 75, 76. So he lived a fairly full life. He gave us a lot of great movies. Of course, it always makes us sad to see our masters of horror leave us. We always want to see more. We always want them to have more time to give us more stories. But what he left us with, what a legacy. So with that, we'll dig into Nightmare on Elm Street, the movie of the hour. Clearly, Nightmare on Elm Street, it's a classic. It's a slasher classic. It's a horror classic. It's a pillar of modern horror, you could say. It is iconic. Freddy Krueger is iconic. He's a pop culture icon. He has transcended horror. Whether you like horror or scary things or not, you know Freddy Krueger. You know his name. You know what he looks like. You know his catchphrases, especially in the 80s. He was on talk shows. He was on commercials. There was merchandise everywhere. People know Freddy Krueger. He's an American icon. So if nothing else, that makes Nightmare on Elm Street a classic. We've got the first appearance of Johnny Depp. This was Johnny Depp's first movie, Wild. And there's a story about how Wes was casting this movie. And I guess his daughter, who was young at the time, saw a picture of Johnny Depp. And she's like, that's the guy. That's the guy you need to cast. So I guess Johnny Depp sort of owes his career to Wes Craven's daughter. It's a fun story. We also have John Saxon is in it, who... respected actor. He's been in a few horror properties. Most notably, he's the cop in Black Christmas. So cop and horror movie, I guess, is his niche. We also have such a wonderful girl next door, relatable final girl in Nancy. And Nancy is just somebody that we can see ourselves being friends with. You know, she's not like an unattainable Hollywood type. She's a real down to earth. And then that white streak in her hair is also like an iconic look in horror. This movie, I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you're familiar with it. You know all these things. So I will move on to really the core of what this series is about, which is why this movie is important to me, my personal history, and why this is a fundamental horror movie for me. It's a movie that I think every horror fan should see. But of course, the farther we get away from 1984, the more movies are out there. And I'm discovering that some younger horror fans haven't seen this yet. So even though it's a classic, it's important to me for its own reasons. This is allegedly the first horror movie I ever saw at the age of 5. At this point, it's sort of lore in my own horror history that I'm not even 100% sure if it's true. I mean, I think my mom told me that. She watched it with me when I was 5. But I also have a memory of watching Phantasm 3 when I was also very young. And I can't remember at this point, you know, what came first. But I cannot remember the first time I watched this movie. It's always just been with me. It's a little hard for me to believe that I would have seen A Nightmare on Elm Street that young, but my mom also told me that my first word was French fry because she took me to McDonald's a lot, which is another American institution that I love to this day. You know, I don't think you get more American than Freddy Krueger and McDonald's. And you might say that's questionable parenting, but I say it builds character. And I love her for it. Love her for both the McDonald's and the Nightmare on Elm Street. So this movie is just super nostalgic for me. It's become part of my personal horror lore. Some other interesting things. This movie came out in 1984. I was born in 1984. So I always like to tell people that me and Freddy Krueger were born the same year. We used to watch Freddy movies. That's what we called them. Not Nightmare on Elm Street. We called them Freddy movies. When my cousins would come visit when I was a kid. I remember there were a few summers where we lived in Texas, like several hours away from the rest of our family. And so like they came and we'd watch part 4. And then the next time they came, we'd watch part 5 or so on and so forth. And in the same vein, again, my spooky mom would let me rent movies during the summer. We would go on like a Saturday and rent 5 movies. And then when she and dad were at work all day and I was home in the summer, I would spend the rest of my week watching these movies that we had rented, these VHSs. And there were always slashers in there. And the funny thing is like they never had like Nightmare on Elm Street, like part 1. They would have like part 3 and part 6 and part 4. And so I watched Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween movies, all out of order, all out of whack. And so I also say that, like, I was raised by Uncle Freddy. And interestingly enough, when I was very young, every time I would watch a Freddy movie, I would have a nightmare, like a horrible nightmare where Freddy is after me, which of course scary movies give us nightmares anyway, but because of the added layer of like, that's what the premise of the movies is about, it was even more terrifying. I have a very specific memory of Freddy Krueger stalking me in a Pizza Hut. And this was your classic Pizza Hut with like the toy claw machine in the corner, you know, where you get your little personal pan pizza for reading your book. So classic Pizza Hut, Freddy stalking me. I do not remember how that particular dream ended. I think usually I would just wake up with the huge sense of relief that he didn't get me. And yet I was never deterred. I never decided, oh, I can't watch these. It oddly made me even more fascinated by Freddy Krueger. And funny story about that. So kids are allowed to watch different things at different ages. And I was at my cousin's on my other side, and she had an older brother, and he was in the living room watching a Freddy movie. And me and my cousin Sarah weren't allowed to watch it. My aunt was like, no, you guys have to go to bed, and he's going to be in here and watch this movie. And I was like, but I'm allowed to watch it. Like, I watch these at home. And that was not, of course, that was not a good enough excuse. That's an excuse any little kid would give. So we kept sneaking down the hallway and like peeking around the corner so we could sort of watch and listen to this Nightmare on Elm Street movie we weren't supposed to be watching. So all of those memories are just like core horror memories. And these are the things that just led me to continue to want to watch more and more and more horror movies as I got older. But these slashers, and especially A Nightmare on Elm Street, were like fundamental comfort horror to me when I was a kid, even though they gave me nightmares. And another reason why I think A Nightmare on Elm Street is so enduring and iconic, of course, as I've already mentioned, is because of Freddy Krueger. But we would not have Freddy Krueger without Robert Englund. And, you know, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger is one of like the great horror performances, maybe one of the best like character performances in any cinema, not just horror. And he's very scary in that first one. And then, as we know, Freddy has evolved to be kind of goofy and like does the one-liners and all of that. And while I prefer the scarier Freddy, like I really like the new Nightmare Freddy because he goes back to a scarier version. That sort of wisecracking villain is part of the reason why we love him. And we wouldn't have that without Robert Englund. And I was lucky enough to meet him once at Spooky Empire in Orlando. That's a horror convention that they do a couple times a year in Orlando. And Robert Englund is one of those actors who has embraced his role, has embraced the horror genre, is always happy to talk about it, is always happy to meet the fans. And so he's just a joy. So, you know, I got in the line as you do, and you feel kind of like a goofball when you're at these conventions waiting in this long line to meet this actor who means something to you, but you don't mean anything to them. I mean, not to say they don't care about their fans, but it's just different. The dynamic is like not even, you know. So you kind of feel like a little bit of a dork waiting in these lines. But I had purchased a big Nightmare on Elm Street one sheet that I was going to have him sign. And so another thing, too, about this is I will not stand in line to meet someone unless I feel like I have something to say to them that they haven't just heard a million times before. And so with Robert Englund, when I got up to him, I told him, I said, you and my mother are responsible for me being a horror fan. And he was just very engaged with me. Like, he looked me in the eye. But also, while I was talking to him, he was like, not just signing my poster, but drawing this really cool, like, Freddy illustration on it. Anyway, and I just told him, I said, Nightmare on Elm Street was the first horror movie I ever saw. My mom showed it to me. You know, I've always loved it. It's a big deal to meet you, you know, whatever you say. And he looked me in the eyes and was talking to me, and he told me that when he was a kid, he used to sit up late and watch these old ghost movies and pirate movies that came on in the middle of the night, and how he wasn't supposed to be watching it either. And, you know, so we had this little moment where we kind of connected over watching this spooky stuff when we were kids. And it was just a delight. And then after I got done talking to him, I went over to Heather Langenkamp's table because she was there as well. And she was also just super sweet, and like she and Robert had banter back and forth, and she had to sign her name like bigger than he had signed his name on my poster. And so it was just like a really lovely experience that kind of brought things full circle for me and just reminded me again why I love horror movies and why I love the horror community. You know, we're a great bunch. And I've heard several people in the horror genre say that, you know, a horror film set or being in the horror community, it's like the best place to be because horror fans and horror creators sort of work out all their stuff through their art. And so when you meet them in person, you know, we've sort of exorcised all of our demons, so to speak. And the only thing left is like joy and camaraderie and, you know, a sense of togetherness and all that. Plus, we're just kind of misfits, kind of outsiders. And so we bond over that. So anytime I can go to a horror convention and tell somebody how much their work has meant to me, it's a big deal, and to meet other fans. And so meeting him was just a super, like I said, kind of perfect full circle moment for me and why this movie means so much to me. One more thing I want to say before I wrap this up is, so there's a little bit of a fairy tale connection in A Nightmare on Elm Street. And in the remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street, which, you know, most people aren't a fan of, including myself, they briefly mention the Pied Piper. And the Pied Piper is a story about man comes to a town that's overrun by rats. He says, I will get rid of your rats for X amount of dollars. The town says, sure. So he plays his flute, drives the rats out, comes back to collect his payment, and they say, we're not going to pay you. So he takes his flute, plays a different song, and takes all the children out of town, and they disappear. It's like revenge on the parents who did not pay him. And I had never, in all my years of watching this movie, had never made this connection with the Pied Piper and Freddy Krueger. Because when you're a kid, why would you? You're just watching a fun movie. And as we get older, we start to see a little more in our movies. We start to get the meaning. And so, of course, some of the really strong parallels between these two stories is sins of the fathers, coming back to haunt the children, generational guilt and trauma. You know, we all have skeletons in our family closets. Like I said, none of this stuff registered when I was a kid, but it just goes to show you that there's always something new to discover about our favorite movies. So I wrote a little blog about this several years ago that goes more into depth about the Pied Piper and the Nightmare on Elm Street connection. It's an interesting little journey I went on, so I will put a link to that blog in my show notes. And then also, if you're interested in the Pied Piper or if fairy tales in general, folklore, there's an episode of the Lore podcast specifically about the Pied Piper and kind of how that has worked its way into pop culture. So I will share a link to that as well. Speaking of something new to discover, as always, I like to give recommendations for similar media if you like A Nightmare on Elm Street. You will not be surprised to hear Halloween, Friday the 13th, because if you're going to watch Nightmare on Elm Street, you got to watch Halloween, you got to watch Friday the 13th. Those three go hand in hand. It's the slasher trinity, if you will. Also, My Bloody Valentine. My Bloody Valentine, the original, the remake's okay. The original's great. It's maybe my favorite slasher, which, I don't know. Is it controversial to say that? Nightmare on Elm Street will always hold the most special place in my heart, but I think My Bloody Valentine is my favorite. There's something very charming about that movie. Maybe it'll end up in this series. Who knows? Also, New Nightmare. If you've seen Nightmare on Elm Street, but you've never seen New Nightmare, please check it out. It's a fun ride. It's Scary Freddy. He has on leather pants. Need I say more? Also, Phantom of the Opera, I think, is a fun one if you like Nightmare on Elm Street. And specifically, there is a Robert Englund version of Phantom of the Opera. Came out in, I think the early 90s, actually. It's pretty cheesy, but it's like a scary version of Phantom of the Opera, starring Robert Englund. As I said, it's kind of gross. Terrified me as a child. So, if you're an adult, you might watch it and think, I don't know, this isn't great. But to me, it had a little magic when I was a kid, and so I think it's at least worth checking out. And finally, Candyman. Candyman is another one that I saw that one when I was probably older child, preteen. I was too young for Candyman. Candyman disturbed me in a very specific way that Nightmare on Elm Street movies also disturbed me. It's also just an all-time great villain, beautiful sets, great backstory, has some of the same themes of justice, retribution, revenge, all of that good stuff. So feel free to check those out if you like Nightmare on Elm Street. If you're listening to this and you haven't seen Nightmare on Elm Street, if you're one of those younger horror fans that I mentioned, please do not hesitate. Do not delay. Get thee to the streaming service. I would say get thee to the cinema. If you can watch it in a theater, please do that. I've never been able to do that, but you got to do it. It's a classic. You got to check it off your list. So next month, I just started Fundamental Frights, but we're going to take a break from Fundamental Frights because next month is Women in Horror Month. And I am going to be joined by Jacqueline from A Cut Above, and we are going to be talking about Karin Kusama's The Invitation. So it'll be women in horror focused. We might dip our toe back into religion and horror a little bit. But you guys know I always look forward to this time of year. Always love to celebrate women in horror. So please tune in for that. And until next time, stay spooky.
Thanks for tuning in. You can find the show on Instagram and Facebook at Light and Shadow Pod. Sign up to become a supporter on Patreon for early access to all episodes and more. Please rate, review, and subscribe to help other people find the show. Until next time, stay spooky.